Welcome back to the Orange Nerd Show. We got the one, the only Mr. Matthew Muir, all the way from the UK. We're talking animation today. We're talking animation with Matthew Muir up next on this episode of the Orange Nerd Show. Mr. Matthew Muir, it is always good to have you on the channel, family of the channel for a while now. Yeah, no, it's always good to have you on, brother. And I love your passion for these topics, animation and what have you. But now you're back on Twitter, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm back on X, but as usual, my address has a load of numbers in it.
It does. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and link his Twitter down below, and your Instagram. He does have Instagram. Now, if you're a Disney fan and if you're into the corporate side of Disney, if you're into animation, Matthew's your guy. You're going to definitely want to follow him on both X and Instagram. So, Matthew, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into our topics. The first topic of the day is extended editions. Okay, so in film, right? So we've seen some of this with movies and stuff. We've seen like Zack Snyder, right? The Snyder cut and what have you, and that was probably the most famous extended cut of all that I can think of. But what do you think about extended cuts in films? Do you agree? Do you think they bring value to the table? Do you think it's something that maybe these studios should stay away from? What are your thoughts?
In some cases, it does, but they need to choose carefully.
Okay, and what do you mean?
Like with Star Wars, some of the changes to the original trilogy sit better with me than others.
Understood. Okay. So now, do you think would you like to see some extended editions when it comes to animation?
Yeah, we've already seen a few, to be fair. We've seen The Lion King and we've seen Beauty and the Beast. Because, back in 2002, they added in a song called Human again.
Right. And if they did like an extended cut for like Snow White, they can add the soup scene, Ward Kimball's famous soup scene in there or something. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, although that'd probably be too risky. It's not as risky with pre-Renaissance films, but no, not as risky with films from the Renaissance onwards, but with pre-Renaissance films.
Well, that's true. And Snow White is doubly risky because it's the very first one too, right? It's tough. But it's interesting. The extended cuts. I mean, they've become a little bit more popular in recent times. I think the Snyder cut sort of kind of ushered that in a little bit. If there were any movies though out there, or any animation or even live action that you would want to see an extended cut of, what would you want? Which film?
I will probably say, first of all, I know I made a huge video a while ago about Once Upon a Studio, about how I wanted to do an extended cut of that because it was a huge project and it needed a bit more emotional depth. But one other film I'd like to, deviating away from Disney, is, Spider-Man 3. That film needed just a huge rework because of the amount of executive interference from Sony.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so they could go in there and do the extended cut for something like that. That's interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't mind that either. That's very, very interesting. Yeah, we'll see, man. I mean, it's interesting. I think that when it comes to this stuff, it's like with Star Wars, I see your point, because you can kind of also, when it comes to extended cuts, you sort of can alter the canon a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it depends on what's in those extended cuts. I guess Marvel is kind of the same in a lot of ways because they have a connected universe. But I think if you pick the right movies and films, you can get away with it. And in this new age of like streaming, it makes it even easier. Right? It's even easier because you can just add that onto your streaming service. Whereas before, like back in like the 90s or like even like the early 2000s, you'd have to actually provide like another DVD or another VHS tape to have any kind of alternate version. Well, now it's like, it's all digital. It's all on these platforms and you can just put it on there. You can just have the extended cut. It's much more easy to to put on there, but we'll see what happens. I mean, it's an interesting theory, and it's something that's not exactly new, but I wouldn't mind Disney kind of getting a little bit more involved with that stuff.
They were back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, like they were back then. Yeah, exactly. So now, why do you think they pulled back from it a little bit since then? What's your theory on that?
It might have been because of the poor box office returns. Because what happened was with the special editions of of Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. What they did was first they run them in cinemas in IMAX, and then release them on DVD.
Right. Okay, interesting. Now,
But Aladdin did really poorly in its IMAX release in late 2003, so I think they pulled the plug after that.
yeah, unfortunately. Interesting. Now, speaking of the Renaissance era, right, with the hand-drawn animation, the movies that you and I both love, everyone loves Little Mermaid and Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. These are masterpieces. I mean, no exaggeration. It was hand drawn. I mean, for the most part, we had elements of CGI in those films, like with the ballroom scene and Beauty and the Beast and with Aladdin, the flying carpet. There were elements of CGI, but I mean, it was still, for the most part, it was hand drawn. What are your thoughts on the future of Disney animation, Matthew? And do you think Disney will ever bring hand drawn back?
I think they might give it a go on an experimental basis again.
Now, when you say experimental basis, do you mean something like a short, like Once Upon a Studio, or Paperman, something like that, or do you think they will experiment on the big screen?
They might. just try and give the big screen perhaps just one last go and see how well it does in box office. How well it does in the box office, and then if it fails, just go back to CGI.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think Disney learns a lot of times Disney learns the wrong lessons with stuff, right?
Like they did with Winnie the Pooh, because that movie did really poorly.
Right, exactly. That movie didn't do well. So I think the mindset.
And yet Tangled did brilliantly, and that was the first, if I'm not mistaken, Disney's first full venture into CGI.
Well, exactly. And Tangled was really the first time for me personally where I think they really nailed the human characters. Like even Pixar, I don't think really did that well before like Tangled. I think Tangled really nailed that. And Tangled was the movie that was the first time that I really thought, okay, we can do fairy tales in CGI now. The human characters look really good. Prior to that, like when you had like Andy from Toy Story and stuff, it always looked a little weird, But yeah, it's interesting. We'll see how it goes. But Disney learns the wrong lessons a lot of times, like you said, with Winnie the Pooh. That movie didn't do well. So Burbank, I think, wrongfully thought, okay, well, people don't like hand drawn. It wasn't.
They decided enough was enough.
Yeah. People. I don't think people are as judgy on the medium as Disney thinks they are. I think if you could look, a lot of these movies, the whole live action remake thing is predicated and centered upon the nostalgia of these hand-drawn animated movies that people love. So it's weird to me that Disney doesn't recognize that. Like Beauty and the Beast live action made $1 billion because of that hand-drawn movie, because people love the hand-drawn movie. So Disney needs to realize, look, people love this. You just have to create the right product. You know what I'm saying? It's like Star Wars. People love Star Wars. But if you make a thing that if you make a bad Star Wars movie, they're not going to see it. You have to still create a good product. They're not just going to go blindly in there just to support a Star Wars movie. Same with hand drawn. If the movie's good, people will support it. If it's not good, they're not going to support it. But it's not hand drawn that's to blame for that,
So why did Winnie the Pooh do so badly in 2011?
Why? You're asking why I think it did so poorly?
Yeah.
It's a smaller movie. I think, Winnie the Pooh is something that I think that it's obviously a popular character, but a movie like that.
Princess and the Frog did brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that like with Winnie the Pooh, it's a small film, and I just think that would be something like for now, like right now, if they did a Winnie the Pooh thing, it'd probably be straight to streaming service. It's just a smaller kind of thing. I don't think it really played to any kind of like determination of like the popularity of hand-drawn animation. I just think it was the IP they chose. I think Winnie the Pooh is great, but it's not necessarily like a blockbuster. A franchise on the big screen. You know what I'm saying?
In a way, it's kind of like, Wallace and Gromit.
Kind of,
by
right?
Almond Animations.
Yeah, exactly. Well said, Matthew. Well said. And here's the other thing too that we should consider is that, like, when it comes to CGI, we've gotten to a point. There was for a long time. There was like an arms race to get more and more and more and more real right? And like if you watch like movies like The Good Dinosaur, like some of the animation in there, like the backgrounds and the water and like the trees and things like that, they were so photorealistic. Like we got to a point with CGI that it was almost like no longer animation. Almost it just looked like a real scene, you know. So I think that once they hit that and they reach that, these studios are now looking at more stylized animation. You know, we've seen it even with Universal. They did a really good job with Puss in Boots and how they stylized that animation, more of a painted look and more fairy tale style, right? We saw a more stylized look for even Wish. You know, they're kind of going back to like having fun and experimenting a little bit. So to your point, Matthew, I think this is the time right now where you might see more hand-drawn animation because these studios are kind of looking for other ways to tell these stories. It's not all about just getting the CGI as realistic as possible.
Yeah, it may even be another hybrid, like trying to blend the two styles together.
Yeah, I mean, are you okay? I'm gonna ask you this, Matthew. Are you okay with something like that? Are you okay with more of a hybrid? It's not a true hand drawn, but something that looks hand drawn, but still kind of done on a computer, stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that because, and I think I think the way they did it in the Renaissance era, it was mostly hand drawn. Like as long as the draw O-rings are actually done by hand and on blank at backgrounds where they can implement the ink and paint digitally, that's all that matters. They don't have to go back to using the multiplane camera and having to physically implement the ink and paint manually. And I don't think it's really possible anymore.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's very laborious. Like when it comes to those ink and paint. I mean, for those of you at home that don't know, the old school animation. I think prior to Little Mermaid, right? I think
The Little Mermaid was the final movie to use those techniques.
Okay, Little Mermaid was a final movie to use like the hand-drawn cells. It's a process. Every single frame is on this celluloid, like clear kind of plastic, and they paint actually on the back of the clear plastic, and that's how you get the look of the character, the painted look of the characters. That's the thing, though. They stopped doing that after Little Mermaid. So it's been digital for like the longest time now. And people don't really realize that. So now, yeah, I agree with you, Matthew. I mean, I'm fine with them kind of doing a hand-drawn looking movie, but utilizing the computer to paint things. And like you said, obviously we can't go back to the multiplane camera. So you can use the computer to kind of do the shots and the kind of weaving in and out of the scenes. I'm fine with that. And honestly, look, Walt Disney was all about the technology. If Walt Disney had computers at his disposal like we do today,
he would take full advantage.
Oh, absolutely, man. I completely agree with you. He would take every advantage to utilize that technology. He was nostalgic to a point, but he wasn't married to the nostalgia. You know what I'm saying? So he wasn't about to suppress progress just for the sake of being nostalgic. That's not what Walt Disney was. That's not who he was, So I think that the look of hand drawn is beautiful. I want to go back to it, but we have to utilize some more modern tools though going forward, because it's like, you can't stay stuck in the past. So it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. Now I want to ask you this, Matthew, speaking of Walt Disney, this is in the fan community, we hear this a lot, and it's obviously speculation. The man died in 1966. It's been a long time, decades and decades. But do you think Walt would be happy with how his animation studio ended up?
I think he may have a few. I think he would be happy overall, or maybe with just a few minor reservations.
Okay, and what do you think? I'm very curious. What are those minor reservations?
I'm not sure what they would be, to be honest. Maybe actually, it's very hard to say what those reservations would actually be.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, look, Walt was he was a perfectionist. He was obviously a brilliant mind, a genius. If you were to go back and look at some of these films, I'm sure there were films that Disney Animation has produced since he passed away that there are probably many of the films he wouldn't approve of. He'd probably look at that and go, I wouldn't have done it that way. I wouldn't have done it this way. But I agree with you. I think for the most part, he would be happy. And I think Walt was also very smart in the sense where he knew, look, you're dealing with decades of animation. Like there's going to be films that are not good. There's going to be, it's the inevitable, you know. Even Walt had flops. He did, you know.
There are going to be films like Black Cauldron and Treasure Planet and what have you.
Yeah, exactly. Which, you know, speaking of those movies, I gotta say, Matthew, and I want your opinion on this. I actually really liked both of those movies. Now, I will say I like Treasure Planet a lot more than the Black Cauldron. But what do you think? You think those movies unfairly got a bad rap? Because I thought they were pretty decent. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's largely the case. I think it's only like decades later that the fan base eventually forgive them, and I think that's very much the way we're feeling now about Disney. I think the fan base seems to hate Wish, but from in 5 or 6 years from now, I'm sure the fan base will warm up to it.
Yeah, probably. Like I remember, like I'm old enough to remember. I was old enough to like I was in my early 20s, I think, when Treasure Planet came out, and that movie did really bad in the theaters, like box office wise, you know. And at that time, no one liked that movie. It wasn't cool to like Treasure Planet. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't cool at all. But as the decades now, 20 something years later, 20 something years later, people, like you said, Matthew, have come around to it. They like that movie now. They talk about it's like a cult classic almost, right? So I wonder what's going to happen with movies like Wish that flopped at the box office, did pretty bad. And then what's going to happen in 20 years with that movie? Is it going to have the same fate as a Treasure Planet, where people fall and look back at it and go, wow, you know what? Wish was really cool. That was actually a really cool movie. Do you think that might happen with Wish?
Most likely.
Yeah.
I can't say for sure, but it's looking increasingly likely that
Wish
will become Treasure Planet 2.0.
Right, Treasure Planet 2.0. That's a great way to put it. Well, and that's the thing too. Even with Star Wars, we've seen it with Star Wars. Even with the prequels. I mean, again,
fans hated them.
Oh, Matthew, you're right. I mean, fans hated the prequels.
There was even this whole song written about George Lucas called. I think it was called "George Lucas Ruined Our Childhood."
I know, it was ridiculous, and I stood up for the prequels back then. I'm like, no, these movies are cool. These are fun movies. You know what I'm saying? I love Hayden. I am a Hayden Christensen fanboy. I think he's phenomenal. I think he did great as Anakin Skywalker. Those movies are really fun movies, you know. And at the time, people hated those movies. They were panned. Like people just despise them. And then now, 20 something years later, people love the prequels. They look fondly on the prequels, you know. Now, keep in mind, to be fair, some of that mindset change was, I think, the Clone Wars series that was set in the same prequel era. And I think that also changed perceptions a little bit. But for the most part, though, I think that as time goes on, the kids that grew up on those movies, they become nostalgic for those movies. We'll probably see the same thing for the sequel trilogy, in 20 years. And like you said, with animation, with Wish and what have you. So it's fascinating. Now, do you think, because Wish was not a huge success. Now, it's doing really good, though, on Disney Plus, right? It's doing really well on Disney Plus. But do you think Disney Animation in particular is going to be able to kind of get out of this rut and start making massive hits again? Like, do you think that they've learned the right lessons to move forward, or do you think it's kind of a big question mark?
It is a bit of a question mark currently.
Yeah.
What do you think, though?
It's tough, man. Well, here's the thing. They're going for the sure bets now, right? So the next movie, they're going to do Frozen 3, which is like, I mean, how do you fail with that, though, right? Because that's like a built-in franchise people love. It's tough. So it's hard to gauge it because they're kind of banking on these existing big IPs. So it's hard to tell. I think the Frozen ones will do very well. But I don't know. What else is on the pipeline for Disney Animation other than that? Do we have any?
We've only got Moana 2 and Zootopia 2. Yeah, it does feel like because of Wish they become so scared.
It's Wish they got scared, and then also just the overall the financial health of the company. They're still going through it, but they're coming out of it. But Disney's not collapsing, despite what you hear on social media, But
I also think the accolade might have played a bit of a part in it as well, because Once Upon a Studio was snubbed at the Oscars, so that might have got Disney a bit scared.
Oh, that's interesting. It was snubbed, yeah. It was, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, yeah, because I mean, the financial health of the company, while like I said, it is improving, but you can't sugarcoat it. I mean, the company got beat badly during the pandemic. I mean, everything that this company depends on was shut down. Travel, theme parks, movie theaters. It took a hit. It did. It's coming out of it, but it did take a hit. So I think the movies that they've kind of mapped out for the future are like these sure bet kind of things, or maybe not sure bet, but a more sure bet than an original film. So you're doing Zootopia, you're doing Moana, you're doing Frozen 2 and 3, 3 and 4. But I hope though that once they kind of get out of the financial rut completely and they're really on course to financial health, I really hope that they kind of get back into these original films, because the importance of original films is that look, Frozen was an original film at one time, and that became a mega franchise for them. You're never going to get, the only way you're ever going to get new franchises is if you do new original ideas. So I hope they don't lean too far into the sequel thing. I understand why they are right now because of the financial situation, and I get that. But after these slew of sequels, Jennifer Lee and her team, they really need to start doing some original stuff, and
otherwise the accountability train will once again make its rounds.
Right, the accountability train, exactly what Bob Iger were talking about, will make its rounds. I think Jennifer Lee really needs to. She's like this close, dude.
You may be surprised to discover also that she's the wife of Alfred Molina.
I'm sorry,
Alfred Molina, who played Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 2. And who also voiced Anna and Elsa's father in Frozen 2.
Oh, that's interesting. I did not know that. And
I believe he also played Indiana Jones's guide at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Wow. Okay. He's been around. That's awesome. Yeah. So we'll see what happens now. With Pixar, it's kind of fun. It's kind of interesting because Pixar, I think Pete Docter kind of dodged a bullet here, because Elemental was not doing that great in the theaters initially, right? But people went to go see it and they loved it, which I saw. I loved it. I didn't see it in theaters. I saw it on Disney Plus. It's a beautiful movie with a beautiful message about learning to kind of like embrace people's differences. Kind of almost like a story about like interracial relationships or whatever, right? Like kind of like understanding someone else's perspective. I loved Elemental. I thought it was a beautiful message, but that movie didn't start off doing really strong, what I'm saying? But as it went on, it kind of had legs. I mean, it did, I think Pete Docter kind of dodged a bullet with that one, because that could have been pretty bad for him, because Pixar's track record lately has been kind of spotty. So I think he's safe for now. I think Jen Lee is safe for now. But we'll see. We will see if that accountability train comes for either one of these. I think it is kind of weird too, Matthew, and I want to pick your brain on this. I think it's been kind of weird how Bob Iger has been kind of kissing Universal's ass when it comes to these quarterly earnings calls and these statements. He's going out of his way almost to sort of praise like things like Super Mario and films like that. Do you think there's something going on with that? Because these executives are bright. Bob Iger, let's be honest, these big studio CEOs have ego.
I think he is starting to doubt himself, honestly.
You think, okay, well, you think he's starting to doubt himself? And I want to ask you this, do you think it's even a move though? Like a play? Like, is he trying to court somebody over there at Universal to come over to Disney maybe?
Potentially.
Because the guy, I forget his last name. I can never pronounce his last name, but Chris.
He invited Hugh Johnston from Pepsi.
Well, yeah, Hugh Johnson from Pepsi. Yeah, he did. And who knows? He might even, maybe he's trying to lure over the Illumination animation head to Disney or something. Because I just found it kind of weird how Iger has been so like overly nice with Universal. Because I know Bob Iger does not like Brian Roberts. And that's and it goes both ways, you know what I'm saying? So why is he doing that? And I'm always thinking like that, like, why is he praising Universal so much? You're right. He might be
maybe it's a strategic move of some kind.
It has to be. It's got to be. I don't know. We'll see. But interesting times happening, man. Interesting things are happening in animation right now. It's exciting. Hopefully Disney and Pixar can get back on the ball here. Streaming is a factor too. It's not just internal problems. Streaming is a factor too. It's expensive to take your kids and your family to the theaters. If you have a young couple with like 2 or 3 kids, you're spending like $100+ probably to go to the theater. At least you are out here in LA, and it's pricey. So it's like, I think a lot of families, because if you have kids, it's like they're looking at this going, well, I don't know, I'm going to be more particular with what animated movies we see in theaters because it's so expensive, and so they're only really going to see the movies that are like, the Super Mario or like the Spider-Verse. They're opting out of these original films because it's a little riskier. Like, am I really
I think that's part of why Disney is trying to train people to go back to the cinemas, like saying that Moana 2 will only be available in cinemas and won't debut on Disney Plus until whatever date.
Yeah, no, that's smart. They have to kind of reprogram the mindsets here, And it took a long time for Wish to come on Disney Plus. Long time. They didn't announce that coming to Disney Plus for a long time as well. So it was like they waited and waited and waited. So they're trying to undo and trying to untie this knot that they kind of created here. And again, it's easy to sort of like for people to sort of say Disney bad, the streaming thing was bad. It's like, but people forget like the circumstances around the pandemic. It was a challenging time for these studios, and these were movies that were already produced and money was already poured into these things. What are they going to do? Not release it, not make something out of it? So they put them on the streaming service. It made sense at the time, but now they have to kind of reconfigure things, and it's a challenge, So it's crazy. But Matthew, it is always a pleasure having you on. I appreciate you, Matthew. If you could just remind everybody where they can find you on Instagram, and then I'll link your Twitter down below.
You can find me on Instagram under the name Matthew Thomas Muir, all one word.
Matthew Thomas Muir, all one word on Instagram. Like I said, if you're into animation, if you're into the corporate side of Disney, he is your guy. Very passionate Disney fan. We love Matthew. He's family here at OG55. And thank you, Matthew, for coming on. And thank you all for watching. Comment down below with all your thoughts on the future of Disney animation, hand-drawn. Jennifer Lee, and the future of her tenure at Disney. I mean, is she kind of on thin ice right now? Is she not on thin ice? What do you think about that? We'd love to hear from you. Comment down below. Thank you all for watching this episode of the Orange Nerd Show. And until next time, have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.